So I've got three jobs here. One is a demand planner job at Coca-Cola Beverages, Florida. One is a senior demand planner job at Baxter Pharmaceuticals in Haryana, India. And one is a demand planner job at Al Futtaim Automotives in Saudi Arabia, which is the distributor of cars like Toyota and many other brands. Now, all these three jobs are in different industries in different countries, but because these are all demand planner jobs, they require these common skills that you see on the screen. And in this video, I will cover with you the most commonly asked questions around these different human skills and technical skills to maximize your chances of success if you are preparing for a demand planner job interview anytime soon. And by the way, demand planner job interview questions seem to be pretty high in demand because recently when I did a survey on which supply chain job interview questions and answers are you most interested in, demand planner came on top. My name is Jamil Hai and I've been working in supply chain management positions across South Asia, Middle East and North America for more than 20 years now. And my mission is to help supply chain professionals like you build real life skills for your job and career that they don't teach you in college. And if you are preparing for any supply chain job interview anytime soon, you can book a one-on-one coaching session with me where I will take your resume, the job description you are applying for, and I will give you a laser guided list of tips and tricks that can help you maximize your chances of success in your next job interview. So if you are preparing for a supply chain job interview anytime soon, do go ahead and book that session on my LinkedIn profile today. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on LinkedIn because I post weekly content related to supply chain on these platforms. Now, before I get into the specific questions on a demand planner job interview, I want to remind you that I've also made a video on demand manager job interview questions and answers, which you can watch by clicking over here. And the difference between that video and this video is that because that's a demand manager job interview preparation video, so you will see the questions are more skewed towards leadership skills because a demand manager typically is managing a number of demand planners. So this video will be covering a bit more technical questions while that video is covering a lot of the leadership questions around demand planning. Although as a demand planner also you need to demonstrate some leadership skills, so I will also cover some questions that come around your ability to build consensus and those kind of things. Now the first question that you need to prepare for is, tell me about a time when you had to organize and plan a task or a project. Now this is a very commonly asked question in any planning job interviews, and because demand planner is no different, therefore I'm putting this question at the very beginning because the recruiter first of all really wants to understand your general abilities as a planner. Forget about demand planning or supply planning, but this question hovers around, when you are given a task, what is your thought process to go around and organize those tasks or the project in different chunks so that you can deliver on time. So the best way to answer this question is to use our tried and tested STAR model. And if you don't know what the STAR model is, you can watch my video by clicking on the link here where I've covered the situation, task, action, result, or the STAR model in a lot of details. But because this is a very behavioral question, the STAR model is the best way to answer it. So make sure that if you are preparing for a demand planner job interview anytime soon, your first STAR story should be around this question. The next question is, what experience do you have with customer segmentation? Now, why is customer segmentation so important? Because demand planners most of the time are working in an environment where they are dealing with different types of customer groups, and the forecasting techniques or the demand planning strategies overall could be very different depending on what type of customer you are working with. Therefore, knowledge and experience on customer segmentation in demand planning positions is very crucial. So if you're working in the CPG or the consumer packaged goods environment, you might be working with, let's say, key accounts, which would be big players like Walmart, Costco, or if you're in Europe, it would be Tesco or Amazon if you are dealing with the e-commerce clients. Similarly, you could be working with the pharmacy segment, which is a very different group of customers with very specific needs. So there could be customers, if you're in the United States, you could have customers like Walgreens, CVS, or if you're in Saudi Arabia, you could be dealing with Nahdi, which is a huge pharmacy chain over there, or in Canada, it's Rexall or Shoppers Drug Mart. Similarly, you could also be working with another segment, which is dollar stores, which is a segment very popular and growing really fast. So if you're in Canada, it could be Dollarama. Dollarama. If you're in the US, it could be Dollar Tree and so on. But all these three different customer groups, as you can see, would have very specific needs. So if you have worked as a demand planner in the past, try to identify which customer segments you have worked in. And if not, try to just build some knowledge around customer segmentation and how different forecasting approaches are used to manage them. The next question is what forecasting techniques you have used in the past. Now, this one is basically around the most fundamental demand planning skill you need to have. So if you've watched my video on Supply Planner job interview questions and answers, which you can watch by clicking on the link over here, where I covered things like inventory modeling, which are the fundamental skills required by supply planners. Similarly, for demand planners, knowing the forecasting techniques are a fundamental skill that you need to know. It's almost like demand planning 101, if I may want to put it that way. Therefore, this question is a pretty commonly asked question. Now, how do you answer this? Now, in your line of products or in your experience, you may have used some of these models. So just having your awareness around these is the first step, and then knowing a lot of details is the next step. So let me just at a very high level give you a rundown of what different forecasting techniques are available, and then you can identify which ones have you used in the past and go deeper into them if this question is asked. So there are basically three models which are used. The first one is the qualitative model, which is used when the data is scarce. So you typically use it in new product launches. If you are launching something like a brand new product and you don't have any basis to provide a demand forecast for it, so what will you do, right? So you will use a lot of qualitative methods, and I'll touch on what those methods could look like in a second here. The second and the most commonly used model in forecasting is the time series models. So in that case, you've got a lot of data for several years where you can use that data to project a trend of what this could look like or what factors could influence it. And we will also cover that. And typically time series models are used in ongoing products as well, and seasonal products like ice cream, or if you are selling chocolates or Christmas trees, time series models are probably the best ones to use. And then you have the causal methods, which are used when, other than the historical methods, there are other variables affecting the forecast as well. So this is a more complicated method or complex model where you are forecasting not only based on a trend, but also the other factors which influence that trend significantly. And a classical example of that is when you are forecasting, for instance, economic data. So for instance, if you are forecasting inflation, now inflation can be affected by a lot of factors like unemployment, like interest rates, like overall macroeconomic environment in the market, what's happening in markets where you export the products, because those are your customers. So if they are not doing well, you are not doing well, and so on, right? So there are a lot of different factors, and that's where causal methods are used. Now, just to give you a quick glimpse on what are the methods within each of these models. So for instance, if you are using the qualitative model, you could be using the Delphi method, the market research method, the panel consensus, because remember, this is the qualitative model, right? So you don't have a lot of data. So you are basically either talking to people or you are gathering a lot of research data to build your forecast. Similarly, you could be using the visionary forecast model or the historical analogy. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of each one of these. You can, of course, go and Google and do more research on them. But it would be a good idea if you are already a demand planner and you are applying for another job as a demand planner. It might be a good idea for you to take a quick note of all these different methods I'm covering, and then you can find out which models are you actually using at your job today. So in the time series model, which you might be using this most likely because it's the most frequently used model, you could be using moving averages, exponential smoothing, Box, Jenkins, X11, trend projections, and so on. Similarly, in the causal methods, you could be using regression modeling, which is a very commonly used model, econometric model. You could be using the diffusion index, leading indicator, and then there are many other models that you can see on the screen here. And also on these basic techniques, one criticism which often demand planners face or demand managers even face is that, oh, your forecast is always very wrong. Well, forecasts are wrong because they are not supposed to be 100% accurate all the time. The purpose of forward forecasting is not to predict the future, but to influence it. What do I mean by that? The purpose of the forecast is not to give you a pinpoint accurate forecast where, yeah, I'm saying that you are going to sell, let's say 100,000 units in January 2025. So I have to sell 100,000 units in January 2025. That's not the intent. The intent is to give the best possible prediction. And then there are KPIs like sales forecast accuracy or bias, where you can put those into context to find out that, okay, based on our historical ability of sales forecasting, This is our best guess, and it could be wrong by 5, 10, 15% depending on the nature of your industry. Now, all of those data points are then allowing the company to prepare for the best outcome in that situation. For instance, if you are saying that I'm going to sell 100,000 units in January 2025, but my forecast error is plus minus 10% and my bias is -5, which means that I have always got a tendency to oversell. If I say I'm going to sell 100, I always sell 105, which is my bias is -5%. You can use all those data points to then say that, okay, this is my forecast, this is my ability to forecast, so I might carry this much inventory. So if I oversell, I've got protection, I've got more inventory than my forecast to protect. And if I undersell by 10% or 15%, it's not a chaos for my cash flow because I'm not sitting on too much inventory. That is really the purpose of the forecast. So it's not designed to be 100% accurate anyways. It's very similar to weather forecasting, right? I mean, in weather forecast as well, we said, okay, tomorrow it's going to be sunny, or 7 days out it's going to be sunny. So it gives you a directional outlook of the weather. I mean, I live in Canada and we always make fun of weather because like the weather forecast 15 days out is always wrong because they just show you that it's going to be bright and sunny when it's not going to be, because they are just trying to keep your mood high because the winters here are so long, right? So the purpose of forecasting is not to be 100% accurate, but to give you the best possible predictions so that the businesses can protect themselves and make sure that they are set up for success. Now, the next question that is asked in these job interviews is, what experience do you have managing demand planning systems? Now, once again, this is a very commonly asked question, and you have probably seen this in my video that I made on the top 5 questions which come in every supply chain job interview, which is around systems. So similarly, in demand planning as well, the recruiter would like to understand what systems have you worked on. So for instance, if you have worked on SAP APO or Blue Yonder or Kinaxis or Oracle, O9, OMP, these kind of popular software, then that's a big plus point for you. But even if you have not, you may have worked on a less popular platform. Just your awareness on what platforms are available out there, and then you can be very honest that, I have not worked on these very famous systems, but I've worked on this other system that my company was using, but I've done my research that some of the tools which are used on the system are very similar to the other ones as well, right? So just having that awareness is important. And in this context, I think as a demand planner, you should also have the awareness of something called the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Gartner, of course, is one of the leading supply chain consulting and research firms in the world. And every year they issue something called the Magic Quadrant, which basically show you that how are these different supply chain software are placed in the industry in a comparative way. Some of them are leaders, some of them are challengers, some of them are kind of visionaries, or some of them are like niche players which are only focusing on a specific need. So you can see, for example, in this particular example of the Magic Quadrant, you can see Kinaxis is really high up on the top. Very popular software used by a lot of companies. Similarly, Blue Yonder is there, OMP is there, Oracle is there, Logility is there. So just the awareness of which players are doing how in these different industries, and having a little bit of context on each software's capability might be a huge asset for you in your job interview. Now, the next question is, give me an example of the role you have played in the S&OP and S&OE process. Now, hold on. I did cover with you the S&OP process in my previous videos, and you can watch maybe my supply planning manager job interview by clicking on the link over here. But what is S&OE? Now, S&OE is sales and operations execution, while S&OP is sales and operations planning. So you can see by the difference in these acronyms that S&OE is more executional and S&OP is more strategic, medium-term planning. This graphic that you see on the screen explains this really nicely, where you can see that the S&OE, or the sales and operations execution process, is basically a 0 to 3 month process, right? So this is the process which you will execute to really run your day-to-day almost. But while S&OP kind of looks at 4 to 36 months, so you could be looking 4 months to 3 years out. So you are basically planning your initiatives during that period of time, and looking at all the other factors. And then of course there is also the long-term strategic planning, where you are looking 3 to 10 years out, and those are the discussions which Probably as a demand planner, you will not be even involved in, because you are kind of, as a demand planner, you are working on a very specific tactical and medium-term strategic role, whereas the long-term planning is all about, okay, where do we put the next factory, or if the companies are acquisition firms, then which is the next company that we want to buy, and those kind of things, right? So those are already out there. But I think as a demand planner, you need to know what is the difference between S&OP and S&OE. Now this table explains it very nicely, where you can see that the S&OP is a process with the objective of aligning supply and demand, whereas the objective of S&OE is to execute that plan, right? So one is to plan and the other one is to execute the plan. And therefore the horizons are very different. So S&OE is basically about, okay, where is my next shipment going to go to? How do I plan my next day, next week, next 12 weeks, right? So 0 to 3 months. The frequency of S&OE meetings, of course, is much higher because you are executing, so they are probably weekly or daily, whereas S&OP meetings are monthly, as we covered in our previous videos. Participants are in S&OE, contextualizing this with your demand planning job. Those are run by middle managers, whereas S&OP is run more by kind of senior managers or executives. S&OE is more tactical, S&OP is more strategic, and then you can see a number of other differences as well. I'm not going to go into the detail, but the key point for your job interview is that you need to have some good examples on how you participated in the S&OE process and the S&OP process. So in S&OP, of course, like I covered in my previous video, S&OP is a 5-step process, and demand planners are mostly in command of the second step of the process, which is the demand review. And you need to have some good examples of how you have either prepared for or run demand reviews, because in every company it's slightly different. In some companies, demand managers run the demand reviews. In some companies, the demand managers want to empower their demand planners to run it. So if you have experience on either supporting or running those meetings, that would be fantastic. And then on the S&OE side, you can talk about meetings that more kind of weekly or daily meetings you have run with your customers or with your internal sales folks, where you are managing day-to-day operations on demand execution. That would be a huge asset for you. The next question is, what is your level of knowledge on Microsoft Excel? Now, I've covered this in my previous videos as well, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. Excel is a critical skill you need to have no matter what supply chain job you're doing, especially in planning, because if you are a supply planner, we covered that you would be running your safety stock models, your overall stock modeling in Excel, even if you have got very complex software that you're working with, but sometimes you want to just export the data and run your pivot tables and do your further analysis in Excel. Similarly, if you're a demand planner, you would really want to run your, for instance, sometimes your building blocks just in Excel, just to understand how my base forecast is going and then how these different initiatives work. Although I must admit that nowadays some of the software offered by some of those players we explained in the previous video are very, very nice and efficient. They are much better than those classical Excel based building blocks, because there's a lot more capability. They can break down the forecast at the aggregate level to the SKU level with the press of a few buttons, which used to take hours before. And then of course there is a lot of AI algorithms which are also now in place, so you can use a lot of different techniques and technologies. But at the end of the day, knowing Excel is still very important, because as the graphic that you see on the screen shows, 67% of the companies out there still use Excel as the primary planning tool, which is just the harsh reality. I think the adoption in the industry for these tools is rather slow. But at the end of the day, Excel is really handy because we are all used to using spreadsheets. Therefore, Excel is a tool which everybody falls back to. And specifically within Excel, I think some of the key functions you need to know as a demand planner are VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, macros, index match, pivot tables, some if statements, and so on. So I'm just putting those out there for you to make sure that you have got some good examples if the recruiter decides to go to that level of detail. Similarly, another question which is now being asked a lot around tools is, what is your experience with data visualization tools? Because as a demand planner now, I think the default expectation is that you know tools like Power BI or Tableau or Click, because as a demand planner, your job is not only to build a forecast and to build the consensus and to run a demand plan, but also to make sure that the numbers that you are producing are available in a very seamless, easy way around the organization. And one of the key challenges demand planners often face is that there are too many numbers around, like, oh, finance gave me this number, oh, sales gave me that number, or supply chain gave me that number. But remember, as a demand planner, you are the one who is consolidating all these numbers. So your top job as a demand planner is to make sure that the source of forecast data is only one in the organization, and that has to be you. So the more easy you will make for people to access your dashboards or your files, the more people will rely on your data, because they will say that, oh, if sometimes what happens is that in meetings somebody would throw a number, oh, the forecast for the month of September is X. But then you will say that, oh, you know what, the demand planner told me the number is Y because I just saw that in the dashboard. I just saw it on Power BI and those kind of things, right? So the more you can make your knowledge public, the better it is. And therefore, knowing these tools is very, very helpful. And now I'll just quickly cover some of the more behavioral questions which all require the STAR model, but you need to prepare for each of these and make sure that you have got a STAR story ready for each of these, because these can come in your job interview and the chances could be very high. The first one is, tell me about a time when you struggled to build consensus on your demand forecast and how did you resolve this challenge? Now, building consensus is one of the most critical human skills you need as a demand planner, because your job is to work with marketing, sales, supply chain, finance, and maybe a few other folks in the organization, and all of them have to agree to one number. Remember, you are the owner of that one number. So it's not easy, because everybody also has their vested interest. Sales has their vested interest in forecasting in a certain way. Marketing always wants to overpromise because their funding is tied to the sales forecast that they have given out. So their bias is always to kind of, err on the side of optimism, if I may put it that way. Supply chain, of course, wants to always play a little bit of a safe game because they don't want to carry too much inventory, while they also don't want to have out of stocks. So everybody has got their different agendas, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, sometimes people confuse this with politics. There is nothing political about this. This is just the way businesses are done. And your job as a demand planner is to make sure that you get everybody to the same page as much as possible. And therefore, try to prepare a STAR story where you have struggled, for instance, at times to build this consensus. What did you do about it? Maybe you had one-on-one sessions with different team members to understand their concerns, and then you brought them together. Like those kind of stories can be very helpful, and they will really show you your ability to negotiate and also to bring everybody on the same page, which is a crucial skill required to be successful in these demand planning job positions. Another commonly asked question is, give me an example of a time when you made a mistake with data and what did you learn from this experience? Now, once again, I want to remind you that if you have made a mistake in the past and admitting it in a job interview, there's nothing bad at it, as long as you explain it in a way what you learned from it. So you can absolutely talk about mistakes you have made in the past and then what did you learn from them, because the recruiter really wants to understand your process of learning from mistakes and making sure that you operate in a way that your chances of repeating mistakes is very low. We all make mistakes. We are all human beings, right? But when you learn from mistakes, you learn the most. And therefore, the recruiter wants to understand what's your thought process around that. And then the last and the most classical question is, give me an example of a very difficult problem you have solved. Now, this question can come at any time during your job interview because this is such a classical problem solving question. So make sure that you have got a very strong STAR story around problem solving. It could be a problem solving story from the S&OE process or the S&OP process, or maybe you had a challenge in adapting which forecasting technique you could use. So of course, I will leave that up to you to decide on which story you want to pick, but make sure that you have a STAR story around this. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I've also made videos on topics like KPIs and supply chain and procurement manager job interview questions and answers, which you can watch by clicking over here. Keep watching.